for sure. And maybe you can shed some light on that in terms of the economy, because I think it was kind of delayed in some ways, people say, with the recession, because there continue to be these stimulus checks and things like that. So it kind of postponed some of the pain. But with the government continuing to do things like that and the Fed raising interest rates, how do you kind of look forward in terms of, do you think a recession is here? Some people say it's going to get much worse. So what's kind of your prediction in terms of what we should expect with that?
Well, let me go backwards to go forwards and just remind that before the pandemic, before lockdowns, before the second quarter of 2020, we had the best economy that we'd seen in a very, very long time. The Trump years was going from strength to strength. We saw super low unemployment. We saw improvement for women and minorities in terms of wages, income. Lots of good things were happening. GDP was growing, and it was a very broad-based recovery. Well, all that, as you know, came to a screeching halt in 2020. That summer, I started writing about the possibility of inflation, and at that time, this was very unorthodox. People thought I was fringe all of a sudden. Have you gone over to the dark side? Why are you talking about this? It makes no sense. But you could see in what was happening, both in terms of some of the lockdown response, but importantly, since the global financial crisis, the expansion of the money supply. Basically, that the U.S. have been printing, and other nations printing money to try to solve the economic malaise, the problems that had come out of the financial crisis, and that was going to catch up with us at some point. And it certainly did. So the first thing when we talk about where are we with the economy, we have to talk about inflation. Now, there's news recently, it looks like it's easing a bit, that it's not as bad as it was. But keep in mind, just because inflation went down to below 8%, it's 7.7 this month. A year ago, it was already at 6%. So you combine those two, in 2 years, we got 14, 15% inflation. Americans' wallets are worth basically 85 cents of the dollar that they had at the start of this period of time. This is super difficult, especially for working and middle class Americans whose they go from paycheck to paycheck anyhow. They don't have a lot of stored up value, and when the value of what they have starts to deteriorate, that's a pretty bad sign. So inflation, number one. The specific question you asked, where are we with recession? So we had a weak first half of this year, a little bit of stronger in the third quarter, but it looks very likely that in 2023 that the U.S. is heading into a recession. You're hearing it from a lot of business leaders who are looking at things like future orders, sort of seeing the pipeline of their own business develop. So I think we are heading into a bit of a challenge. The good news is that the labor markets have still been pretty tight, and so there are jobs for those who are willing and able to work. I do think that your point on stimulus checks and all the things that went on had two effects. One, furthered the inflation that we're seeing, because that was just money that was created out of thin air, no productive base. And secondly, it was certainly a disincentive, a demotivation for people to work and